This week on Coffee and Conversation, we caught up with Jeremy Hunt, the UK Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs. Minister Hunt shared his views on a wide range of issues: free speech in emerging democracies like Myanmar, the fluid nature of facts in journalism, and of course, his views on Brexit.
Well, I don't think there's ever been a more important time to pursue journalism because one of the most important things in a democracy is for the public to know the facts before they make a decision. And so we need journalists who help people understand the reality of situations. And it's an absolutely vital part of any democracy. So we're going through a transition at the moment because when I was your age, we didn't have social media. And so people initially take something that's written down as being truthful, and we're learning that in a social media world, stories can catch fire that aren't true. And so people are beginning to wise up to that. But I think in this era where anyone can become a journalist and an author, people who are focused on establishing the truth in any situation are going to become even more important. So I think it's going to be a vital role. Well, what I would say is that I think hosting those big international events is fantastically important for not just your profile as a country, but also for your tourism industry. And it fills up hotels, people buy airline seats, people spend their money in the shops and the restaurants. And so we didn't just have the Olympics, we had the World Rugby Championships, the World Athletics Championships, and a huge range of other sporting events in the last decade. And we think that's a pretty important part of our economy. So I think it's a very smart thing for Singapore to do that. In terms of legacy, because the Olympics is the biggest sports event that it's possible to hold, the risk you have with an Olympics is that you build a huge number of sports facilities that end up not being used in the future. And sometimes people have pointed to the stadium in Seoul, for example, after the Seoul Olympics, or in Athens, that have not ended up being used. So I think the key thing is to build your sports facilities knowing how they're going to be used afterwards. And then you can build them in a way. So we built our Olympic Stadium in a way that allowed a third of the seats to be taken away and for it to be turned into a football stadium, which it now is, and it's a very successful football stadium. So I think that's the key if you want to have a really good legacy. Well, that is the art of diplomacy. You have to find a way sometimes to deliver uncomfortable messages, sometimes to your friends, in support of the values that you believe in. And I believe very strongly that media freedom is a very, very important part of an open society, and an open society has been at the heart of the progress that we've made as a human race over the last few hundred years, really since the Enlightenment period. So I think there's a very, very important role for journalists, and the two Reuters journalists, Walon and Cho So-u, were aiming to report on the Rohingya crisis in Rakhine province, and we're very concerned when they were arrested, and there was a lot of concern about due process in their trial. And so this is one of the issues that I raised with the Burmese government when I went to visit them in September. But that doesn't mean to say that we didn't have good discussions about other elements of our relationship. But I think part of what I have to do is to raise issues that maybe it would be difficult for someone from inside Myanmar to raise themselves. You don't always raise them publicly. Sometimes you raise them in private and not in public. And it's a different situation with different countries. But I think it's a very important part of our role, because I think I want Britain to be a country that doesn't just look for Britain's economic advantage, but also defends the values that we believe in. Well, we have a very close friendship with Singapore, which has really existed for the whole time that Singapore has been a nation since 1965. Singapore is actually 1 year older than me. That friendship is based on shared values. And Sir Stamford Raffles arriving in Singapore was one moment in a 700-year history, but it was an important moment. And when we look at Singapore, modern Singapore today, it's an extremely successful country, a thriving, dynamic economy, 8th richest country in the world in terms of per capita GDP. But you've got there based on values that very much shared with Britain: belief in the rule of law, independent judiciary, a very stable political system. And these are parliamentary democracy. These are all things that, very much what Britain feels is part of a modern, successful country. And so that's why I think we have a very close friendship. And I don't think we've ever pivoted away from Asia, but we are very happy to stay very involved in Asia's development because we think it's such an important part of the world. Well, I think that's a very, very smart question, because one of the problems that we've had in recent years is that the benefits of growth haven't been spread evenly amongst the entire populations of countries like the UK, European countries, the United States. And one of the things Theresa May, the British Prime Minister, always says is that you need to have a country that works for everyone, an economy that works for everyone. But particularly since the financial crisis in 2008, there have been chunks of the population that have felt left behind. And, the capitalist system, which has created so much prosperity and opened so many possibilities, will only in the end work if the vast majority of people think that they have a stake in it. And so I think one of the major challenges we have going forward is to make sure that we have economic systems where everyone feels that they have a chance to get ahead. If they work hard, they can benefit from the success of the country that they live in. And so that, I think, is a big challenge for policymakers all over the world.